Hello, welcome back to Box Room Books, and this video will be all about this book, Juno Loves Legs by Carl Geary. This is another library found. I'd never heard of this book before or this author before. I went to the library. I don't usually do this, but I kind of was looking for a couple of specific things. I was looking for something by Amy Bender because I think I'd read one of her short stories. I'm reading a lot of short stories at the minute online. So I thought they might have one of her collections, but they didn't. And I was looking for John of Johns, which is Douglas Stewart's latest. I think it just came out earlier this year, didn't it? I think John of Johns. They didn't have either of those things. But yeah, I stumbled on this, and it has got a Douglas Stewart endorsement. He's saying, "This broke my heart, never wanted it to end." So I thought, well, if it's coming on his recommendation, it can't be all bad. I thought I quite liked the cover and the title. I like that photo. So I thought I'll give it a go. And it is heartbreaking. It's one of the saddest books I've ever read, I would say. It is quite heartbreaking. It did remind me a bit of Shuggy Bain. It also reminded me a bit, I think, yeah, if you like Shuggy Bain, if you like The Boy from the Sea, it's an Irish book. The Boy from the Sea is one that I've talked about before a few times, and absolutely one of my favourite books of all time, The Boy from the Sea. So yeah, I think if you like that, you'd like this. And also, if you like Ginger and Me, which I don't think I've maybe not mentioned that before, but that's a great book, Ginger and Me, about friendship. I do like a friendship story. I like a story that's about, platonic love and friendship. And yeah, so Legs and Juno, they are two friends who meet at school, and then they are kind of parted for a while, and then they are reunited and then parted again. This book is a coming of age story, and the main character then is Juno, who is the daughter of quite sort of parents who maybe are not emotionally available, let's say that. I don't think the mother in particular, I don't think is a bad mother, I wouldn't say. But this is kind of, she's grown up in the 1980s. It's a different time. It's a different generation. And so, yeah, there's not an awful lot of, emotional support there for Juno. She goes to a Catholic school, which is also quite a harsh. So she's in this quite harsh environment. They are suffering financial hardship, the family, and so she's obviously feeling the brunt of that. She kind of finds a bit of solace at the library. So there's a librarian who she just refers to as Miss H, who kind of takes her under her wing a little bit. So she's obviously getting some solace in the books that she reads and in spending time at the library. But something that's quite unusual about this book is there are no specific references. She talks about sometimes listening to records as well, with Legs. But she never actually pinpoints any specific, she doesn't talk about specific books that she finds solace in, or specific music, or specific, artists or records or anything like that, which I thought was quite an unusual thing. So it's kind of, you can just, I suppose, imagine you can put your own kind of, things in there, I suppose, and imagine your own music that you've found solace in, or books that you've found solace in. So that was quite an unusual sort of thing that I found quite interesting about the way that Carl Geary writes. I mentioned she goes to a Catholic school, so religion, I would say, is like an important theme in the book, and so that the nuns, the sisters that they're taught by, and the father at the school, who's kind of the head of the school, are particularly cruel, I would say, to there are harsh punishments for anybody who steps out of line, kind of thing, which I guess was fairly standard at that time in these kind of schools. Another theme in there is grief and how the family deals with grief. So, spoiler, Juno's mum dies about a third of the way into the book. And so it sort of is dealing with how a child who doesn't have the emotional support of the other parent, so, you know, that her father is not, and she has a sister as well who is sort of estranged from the family, and you don't really find out why until quite near the end of the book. So, and her father kind of turns, he was a drinker anyway, but he just turns to drink. He sort of finds solace in drink. So the book does deal with, sort of grief, and sort of, we see that grief through the eyes of this, you know, this young girl. And I think Geary does pull off the child's perspective really, really well. I think he's really mastered that. He really has. Do a little snippet of just the way that Geary describes the silence that kind of comes over the house after her mother's gone. So we spoke little, him and me. We had gone to our separate parts of the house, but I don't remember him being there much. The house was quiet, beyond quiet. A fat and thickening silence settled over the curtains, between the plates, and over the sewing machine. It left the horoscopes uncut and the kettle unfilled. It dripped from the draining board, the chairs, and the unset table. At times I'd pause while dressing, thinking I'd heard Mum's footsteps downstairs. I just think that's such an evocative passage and you know, way of describing loss and grief and the silence that, like I say, that's fallen over the house. She mentions there the sewing machine. So the mother, really the only thing that she has to try and prop the family up financially, she has a sewing machine, and she does sewing jobs for ladies in their neighbourhood. And the book starts off with actually a description of Juno watching her mum doing alterations on this, I think it's a wedding dress for like one of their neighbours. And you can sort of, because we're seeing this through Juno's eyes, and you can just see the great awe and admiration that she has for her mother, and her mother's skills, her seamstressing skills. You can, you know, Juno really looks up to her mother, and you can tell, you know, that she wants to actually take on these skills herself and learn how to sew. And so this is part of the fabric of the novel, is built around this imagery around the sewing machine and the sewing that her mother does. And there's a very sad bit where they have to pawn the sewing machine. And then it also mentions horoscopes. So her mother cuts out horoscopes from the newspaper, and she saves the ones that she likes. So that's why it mentions horoscopes there. The thing I love about this book is it does have LGBTQ plus representation in there. So Legs is actually gay, and he describes to Juno at one point a chaplain who he has obviously kind of fallen in love with, or is a bit sort of infatuated with. And I'm just going to read you just this very short paragraph of her sort of how she responds to this. So they've spent this night together where they've just been taught, you know, they're friends. It's not a romantic kind of night that they've spent together, but they've sort of shared secrets with each other, and that's one of the things that he shared with her. In truth, that was not his word, not love. He never said that word, but I saw his face and the way he didn't say love, the way his body sank into that unrequited place. That was what Legs showed in the game, where he showed me his and I showed him mine, and we told each other our stories. So, you know, this book, it deals with so many huge issues, social issues, you know, poverty, death and grief, abusive relationships, like I said, religion, homelessness, and sort of very, very subtly, the AIDS crisis, because they're growing up in the 1980s. But I love the way that it's just all done so subtly. Both of them, Juno and Legs, have engaged in sex work because they've been so desperate at certain points. And I think the way that that's dealt with is it's just done so subtly. It's never like there's nothing kind of, you know, preachy about it or anything like that. It's just all done in such a kind of understated, it's very understated, I'd say, this book, very, very understated. And I love that about it. I think one of the reasons I really liked this book was because my mum used to have, she talks about it being a Singer sewing machine, and she describes this Singer sewing machine that her mum has. And my mum used to have a Singer sewing machine, and I do remember fondly, the noise that it made, and watching my mum, sewing on it. But the thing it also reminded me of, and you should definitely check this out, and I'll drop a link actually in the down there. There is a poem by Robert Crawford, and it's called Opera, and it's about a small child watching the mother at work on a sewing machine, and it describes that in a really kind of evocative way, and really kind of elevates that craft of that skill of sewing on a sewing machine. It really elevates it to the level of a high art form like an opera. So yeah, I'll drop the link for that down there, because it's a beautiful little poem. I absolutely love that. It's one of my favourite poems. Can't say it has a happy ending, but I would say there is some hope at the end. I felt anyway. It's quite fairly open, sort of ambiguous sort of ending. But yeah, it is very, very sad. Like I say, one of the saddest books I've ever read. But it's so beautifully, it's so well written, so well written, so well executed, and like I say, the way that Geary manages to pull off that child's perspective and the child's voice kind of thing is masterful, I would say. So there you go. Juno Loves Legs, highly recommend it. Carl Geary. His debut, this was not his debut. I thought it was his first book, but it wasn't. He wrote another book before this one called Montpellier Parade, which I probably will check out actually, because I do think he's definitely one to watch. Great book, really recommend it. So thanks for watching. Keep reading, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.